Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs, connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
We have an extraordinarily distinguished and well-informed panel to take on this topic. Ambassador Michael Froman, who is the Vice Chairman, President of Strategic Growth at MasterCard. And prior to joining MasterCard was the Special Representative on Trade for the Obama administration. And before that had a distinguished leadership career at Citigroup. We have Ambassador Miguel Ruiz, who among other roles has been Mexico's ambassador both to Japan and to Italy, and also permanent representative at the Organization of American States and the UN organizations in Rome. And we have Mary Ellen Iskandarian, who is the president and CEO of Women's World Banking. So hello to you all. Thank you for joining us. And as we're gonna chat, we have a series of questions, but we will be inviting our audience to also submit questions. We have we'd like you to do that in the chat function or also in the Q&A function. We'll be keeping an eye on both of those areas, and I will start feeding those questions in probably about halfway through the time we have allotted today. To frame the question, I think it's become clear, very, very clear, that COVID has accelerated the digital revolution extraordinarily. I mean, some estimates say maybe by a decade or more. And therefore, it's probably the most tangible expression of the growing inequality that has also taken place during the COVID pandemic, where already the digital divide that was a serious concern and was excluding many tens, hundreds, millions of people, maybe even billions of people from the global growth that was going on, arguably has got significantly worse now. And so it's a higher priority to figure out how we include those people left out of the digital revolution in the digital revolution. And the panelists today are going to address that topic. And I want to start really by asking each of them, their assessment of how severe the problem is now of digital exclusion, and also what they see as possible solutions to that from how maybe the digital revolution has helped some people, at least, who might have not been able to make it through the pandemic shock to actually come through and be more resilient than maybe would have been likely before the digital revolution, and what ideas you're looking at going forward as to how we do include them. And I'm going to start with you, Mike. And again, this is one of the sessions that we've organized during Catalyzing Change Week for those who've been honored as award winners in our Catalyst 2030 awards, and we'd like to congratulate MasterCard as being one of those winners, and thank you for all the partnering that you've been doing with many of the social entrepreneurs that we represent as a group. But Mike, to you with that question, how has the pandemic changed this whole question of digital inclusion and inclusive growth more generally?
Well, thank you, Matthew, for having me. Look, I think you're absolutely right. It accelerated some pre-existing trends, and it also laid bare a number of the disparities. And I'll just give you a couple examples. We've been involved on financial inclusion for the better part of a decade. We committed to bring 500 million individuals, unbanked individuals, into the financial system, and dealt with it like any other objective of the company, with everyone having goals and the like. We actually achieved the goal in the middle of COVID and looked around and thought this was the time to double down, because COVID really underscored just how important it was that individuals be connected to the digital economy in order to get assistance from their governments and others. And also, very importantly, micro and small businesses, in order to deal with their customers and their suppliers, to be able to stay alive and to thrive. And so we have been working with over 100 governments around the world to help them with their social disbursements around COVID, help them with their pension payments, help them digitize. And it's helping to accelerate that digitization of the social safety net, which is absolutely critical to a modern economy. And then similarly with micro and small businesses, making sure that they can go digital, go from being a mom and pop brick and mortar storefront to being an online e-commerce player, able to get paid safely and securely, able to deal with their customers, able to get access to capital through microfinance institutions and community development financial institutions. All of that's been very important to digitize as part of this. Some of this, as you said, is about broadband and access to digital infrastructure, but it goes beyond that. That once you even have the infrastructure, making sure that you've got the applications and services, the right enabling environment, so that the very fast growing area of digital services providers, fintech companies and the like can really reach the last mile and help individuals and small businesses survive.
Thank you. Just could you elaborate a bit about that government safety net and what you've been seeing there in terms of why has that been such a positive during this crisis?
I'll give you an example. In a number of countries, as diverse as Chile, Belarus, and Israel, it used to be that somebody who was retired would go to the local post office in person to pick up their pension check. And of course, in the middle of COVID, you couldn't do that. These were folks who weren't necessarily used to being online, weren't necessarily tech savvy. And so working with those governments, first we digitized the pension payments so they could get a card, they could get their pension payments automatically without having to put themselves at risk for going to a post office, but also gave them training so that they could begin to engage efficiently in the digital economy. And I think that has helped them become part and get advantage to access to other services, access to other financial services and the like, to help them create a more secure financial future as well.
Mary Ellen, if we turn to you, you're working with women in many developing countries. What have you observed as to how the COVID pandemic has reinforced or changed the questions around digital inclusion?
Well, I think so much of what Mike just pointed out as the global set of questions and issues and opportunities of digital financial inclusion just kind of gets a double click for women. There are still 300 million fewer cell phones in the hands of women. That number exponentially increases when you talk about an internet enabled or smartphone. Far fewer women have access to that technology, which is the predominant technology for mobile money and mobile financial services. Digital identification, which is increasingly becoming really the only way we are going to be able to connect to all of these social safety nets and other programs that are available increasingly digitally, you need that digital identification. If you've got 1 billion people, the number the World Bank uses, and I know this is an issue that MasterCard has put a lot of time and attention on as well, the vast majority of that billion are women without access to the digital identity. So I think just the overall issues of inclusion seem to hit women harder. By the same token, you've seen, and we've seen a lot written even in the developed world, that the care burden of women, which is always so much greater than it is, several hours a day. We refer to the third shift that women often work in addition to their day jobs, so to speak, has just been exacerbated and is really slowing women's return to the labor force now in recovery. And so I think far-sighted governments that are looking at childcare included into that social protection payment are really the ones that are seeing that opportunity to allow women to be that important factor of growth and returning to the labor force.
But overall, I mean, there is a sort of pretty clear picture that women's development has been set back significantly, but during the pandemic, and has the digital benefits that have occurred, I mean, have they been? How do they add up compared to the setbacks in general? I mean, overall net.
Well, I think the thing that I was just alluding to earlier around the inability for women to sort of overcome some of the challenges of the care burden and unpaid labor is a very significant factor that we can't just gloss over. That said, I'm actually kind of optimistic in terms of financial inclusion, and particularly for women in COVID. India, before this current just apocalyptic experience they're going through now, when we first had the crisis, India was really able to leverage their previous success in having established digital identification, having established the no frills PMJDY account. But then they took it one step further, really innovatively. India and the only other country in the world was Peru, made their COVID social relief payment only payable to women. So you saw 25 million accounts opened in a matter of weeks, largely by women, in order to facilitate receipt of that payment. And what the research, pre-COVID, and we're seeing it again in this last year, is when you direct that social protection payment to the woman directly, and she has some modicum of control over how it's spent, everybody in the family eats better. You see it spent in a more equitable way across all of the members of the family, and particularly for children. So I'm very hopeful as more women have been included. You saw some countries like Indonesia convert a conditional cash transfer program that was largely used by women into a COVID relief payment. And so women seeing this opportunity to use that payment in different ways, to start businesses, to save, against potential, future disasters. And so I think there's a real opportunity that's been made possible by COVID relief, and particularly digitally delivered COVID relief for women's financial inclusion.
So Ambassador Ruiz, or Miguel, you're now having finished your ambassadorial work, and now at Tec de Monterrey, the extraordinary university system across Mexico, leading their UN SDG work. How do you see these questions that we've been talking about around economic inclusion and the digital revolution, particularly, I think, because Mexico still has an extraordinarily large informal economy compared to many of similar size, and there's been a sort of, I think, a lack of trust as well as a lack of digital ecosystem that has sort of held back some aspects of digital inclusion, like microfinance and banking and so forth. How is COVID altering your assessment of that digital challenge in Mexico? I think you're on mute at the moment.
Thank you, Matthew, for referring to the case of Mexico, which obviously I know better than many other countries. And I think there was a trend to be digitalization everywhere in Mexico, as all around the world. But the particular characteristic that we have seen in Mexico is that many people that has become digitalized does not have an account, a bank account, or if they have a bank account, they don't use the bank account. So there is I would say, deep resistance to use digitalization as a obvious way to get financial inclusion. But I think there is a responsibility not only in the government of Mexico, but governments around the world to adopt a national strategy for financial inclusion. And in Mexico, we have that financial strategy. We started with a national policy for financial inclusion, prioritizing digitalization in 2016. A year after, that was there were several measures to improve that digitalization and the expanding of the financial infrastructure. In 2018, a new fintech law was established precisely to promote digitalization and the participation of non-bank entities in this process of digitalization. In 2019, a new CODI system, QR code, system for payments, was established with the participation organized by the central bank, with the participation of all the bank institutions. And this system today has more than 5 million accounts participating in the system. So there is already a lot of movement going in the right direction. And fintech institutions, non-bank institutions, are allowed to promote mobile money transfers, and they are, making progress. I would say maybe a little bit slower than we thought 3 or 5 years ago. My suspicion is that there is an atavic habit in Mexico, in many people. They just don't have enough trust, neither in the financial system nor the government. So they prefer to go and to keep cash. And they feel that in that way they are not being fiscalized. In that way they are not being supervised by someone else that know their movements on how they move their money. So this is something that has to be improved with, I would say, additional policies, additional measures to put the right incentives for the people going and use more bank accounts and use more digitalization methods, especially the mobile cell phones or computers. And the government can make a lot on this, increasing the use of mobile payments. They are using it, but it's not the only method. In many places, people really want to receive their money in cash, 100, 200, 500. And really, there is something going on there very, very important. I think the next strategy should focus on those kind of social resistance, cultural resistance, if you want to call them, cultural resistance to improve, the expanding of mobile money services.
And at the moment, the Mexican government hasn't been particularly embracing some of those digital methods. So do you think it's going to change?
Well, the government right now, its main priority is to expand the branches of the Banco de Bienestar, the well-being bank, which is associated with all the government transfers, especially to two groups, young people and the elderly people. And they are really expanding the amount of money that they are transferring to these individuals. But depending on whether the people are in an urban area or a rural area, the method may change. The main priority of this government is to expand the branches of the Banco de Bienestar throughout the territory. And the guess is that when they have the whole network there, they will use mobile money transfers and at local level. Maybe this is a good strategy. We'll see how it works in the coming future.
So I wanted to ask one more sort of broad question about what we're seeing, and then dive into partnerships and how to work with social entrepreneurs and others to drive greater digital inclusion. But the macro question, I'll turn to you, Mike. I mean, there are issues of trust. I mean, I think Aadhaar in India had a lot of backlash against the privacy invasion, even in developed countries like America. That we don't love digital the way we used to. Are we now? There's no going back here. To have an inclusive economy, it has to have a digital core, I assume. So what do we do to address these trust questions, and how big an issue is trust in terms of the people who currently are in the informal or not included in the growth that we're seeing?
Well, you put your finger on it. It's absolutely paramount. And I think first it starts with having data responsibility and principles around that. Our view is you as an individual own your own data, should control your own data, should benefit from your data. Our job is to protect your data. And we need to make sure that people have a full visibility and consent as to how their data is being used. As you said, as we move more and more towards a digital core of the economy, it also underscores the concern about fraud and about cyber intrusions. And so we need to make sure that as people are being moved online, that coming with that are strong cybersecurity protections, strong anti-fraud measures. Mary Ellen mentioned digital ID, absolutely critical. We need to know that you are who you say you are when you're operating online, and that somebody hasn't taken your identity. And oftentimes that there's some big architectural issues around this. Do you want a single digital ID system that has one big honeypot of information that is a magnet for people to hack, particularly with biometric data? Once you lose your biometric data, it's not as though you can replace your fingertips or replace your retina. Or do you want to have a more distributed system where there is no central database, and where you can just verify from existing data that you are who you say you are? I use the example in the United States that when my son wants to go buy alcohol, he has to hand over his driver's license, and it's got his date of birth, his address, a bunch of other information that the guy behind the counter doesn't actually need to know. What the guy behind the counter needs to know is he over 21 or not? Yes or no? And if you can build a digital ID system where that information, where you're minimizing data sharing, protecting data, minimizing the likelihood that it's going to get hacked, and certainly protecting biometric data above all else, then we have some possibility of helping to rebuild and that trust framework that's going to be so important for people to participate in the digital economy.
Mary Ellen, same question to you.
Well, again, I'm seeing this moment as kind of a fascinating opportunity. Just an anecdote, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, it always has financial services at the very bottom of that trust ladder. Even if business overall, it tends to be one of the trusted segments, financial services somehow always comes out at the bottom. Interestingly, though, they published a sort of COVID update. So the 2019 report came out in January. They published a COVID update in May, and you saw financial services leap to the second most trusted area. And interestingly, it was specifically because financial services in partnership with government were viewed as being critical sort of first responders at the front line of helping get COVID relief and being supportive during that first terrible, really scary period of the lockdown. And so I think it really, for me, it was such an interesting moment that there is the possibility to build trust. And for women in particular, the linkage of trust to digital and financial capability is absolutely essential. And we use that word. First of all, we think of both the digital and financial as really seamless, and you can no longer, in our view, think about financial literacy without digital literacy. But it's not just understanding the concepts, but really feeling the confidence, and with confidence comes trust, to know that your data is protected, all of the the safeguards that Mike referred to, but that you have the confidence to use the technology. And we've got lots of indications that when women have that digital and financial capability, they'll actually be sort of deeper adopters, because the digital allows them the things that are so important to them, like the reliability, the security, and probably most importantly, that confidentiality, being able to keep their financial transactions to themselves. Women will share a cell phone to make phone calls, to use data, but they won't bank with a shared cell phone. And so I think that, again, I see a great opportunity here that COVID has accelerated.
So Miguel, I mean, financial literacy and digital literacy, what's the role of education in all this? And particularly, how do you think about this at Tec de Monterrey? You've got this Fair Center that you've got in partnership with MasterCard. What is the role of educational institutions in helping to drive digital and financial inclusion?
Well, I think everyone realizes the importance of educating people in financial matters. And for the first time last year, when the government launched its national financial inclusion strategy, they included education as a key component, with the participation of the Ministry of Education. And so now the Ministry of Education has, as part of its duties, to promote financial education, a very good step. And as you just mentioned, the Tec de Monterrey just established 1 month ago a new Fair Center, Financial Actions and Response Center. And they are trying to develop a financial ecosystem with the participants of all players, all stakeholders in the financial system, to promote financial inclusion through digitalization. This is the main purpose of the center. And I think Tec de Monterrey has a very good reputation, generally, in everything the Tec de Monterrey initiates, but especially dealing with financial matters, or dealing with, promoting economic growth through infrastructure or social economic innovation. I guess this center, with the partnership with MasterCard, will make a difference for many people in Mexico, because they will concentrate in making research on how really to overcome these barriers that we have been talking about: distrust, education, communication. And in this sense, I think the Fair Center will make a difference very soon. One of the things that characterizes the Tec de Monterrey is that they are really effective. They just don't speak about things, but they are effective. They produce results. So I can imagine that less than 1 year, you will see many results of this new center established by the Tec de Monterrey.
Thank you.
And in partnership with the government as well, because the government has promised to include this education curricula, in the education system.
So before I turn back to Mike, I'd invite again audience members to submit some questions in the chat function. We'll go across to those shortly, and particularly if Giru is Giru Blimora, the founder of Catalyst 2030. I know a lot of your recent work, Giru, has been in financial literacy. Maybe you have a question, but please do put your questions in the chat field. We've been talking just a bit about partnership, and Mike, how important is partnership with organizations on the ground as we think about economic inclusion? Can you give some examples of what you're doing through the Center for Inclusive Growth, but also more broadly at MasterCard?
Well, they're absolutely critical. And I don't know if this was a coincidence or not, but you've got two of our partners on the screen.
I'm suspecting it wasn't a coincidence.
As Miguel said, we're delighted to be a supporter of the FAIR Center. And as he said, not just because of the research that will be done there, which will be really important to all of Latin America on financial inclusion, but the FAIR Innovation Lab, which really focuses on helping to support fintechs in this space, in the financial inclusion space, I think could be really could be a major contribution. And for Women's World Banking, we held together with the Rockefeller Foundation, we launched something called data.org to help bring data science to the nonprofit and government sector to have social impact. And we launched a challenge and had over 1,200 applications in the challenge, submissions from all over the world, from over 100 countries. We gave out, I believe, 9 awards at the end of the day. Women's World Banking was one of the 9, and using new technologies to really help on helping female entrepreneurs with technical assistance to help them grow their businesses. We're delighted to be working with them on that. These are 2 of just literally scores of partnerships we have, large and small. And I'll mention one other, which I think was really innovative. The center came up with the idea and then sold it to various stakeholders. But we worked together with USAID and what's now called the U.S. Development Finance Corporation to help support a loan guarantee program that, working with HDFC Bank in India, will now provide $100 million of loans to micro and small businesses, the majority of which are intended to be women-owned, women-run businesses. And so a small amount of support from us, an interesting partnership structure, helped buy down the cost of the subsidy, allow the US government to work with a local bank, obviously a very good bank in India, to reach and get capital to an underserved segment of the population. And that's the kind of thing that, if we get it right, can be done over and over again in different regions of the world. So we've got partnerships with nonprofits like Women's World Banking, with academic institutions like Tec de Monterrey, and also with other private companies. We worked with Unilever a few years ago to create a mechanism started in Africa where we digitized the relationship between a micro merchant and their Unilever supplier and a local bank. And what used to be done entirely in cash was now visible to the local bank, and the local bank could begin to lend to the micro merchant to buy more from Unilever, to sell more to their customers, to grow their business, to create jobs. And the bank felt comfortable with the likelihood of repayment because we helped organize the flow of data between the 3. And so lots and lots of creative opportunities to work together across sectors. And it's the only way we're really going to be able to bring the collective innovation of social entrepreneurs, the private sector, the academic world, and governments to the table.
And I mean, I know there's always a lot of discussion about cultural differences between for-profit institutions like MasterCard and social non-profit organizations. What do you see as the sort of key to making a partnership work between those different cultures?
Great question. Look, I think first of all, it's all common sense, but putting yourself in the shoes of the other and really understanding their perspective, what drives them, their priorities. I think co-creation is absolutely critical. None of us have the right answers all by ourselves. It's really working together to come up with solutions that are appropriate for the sector, for the country, for the target market, like women entrepreneurs, and getting the best input from all relevant stakeholders in designing those programs.
Marianne, I mean, from your point of view as a nonprofit organization, how important has been partnerships with organizations like MasterCard in the for-profit world, or indeed with governments, or with other smaller social entrepreneurs on the ground in terms of driving the agenda of women's empowerment through financial inclusion?
It can't be overestimated. And in fact, I'd say those 3 sectors have been so important to our role, Women's World Banking 42 years ago started out as largely as a membership organization for microfinance institutions. And really, as technology has really come to be so predominant in the way that financial services are delivered to the and underserved in the emerging markets, that partnership model has just expanded. I mean, we really see anybody who's got a supply chain or a way into that woman's life as kind of fair game as coming up with a model to deliver financial services. And I'm delighted, we were thrilled actually to be one of the winners of the data.org competition, but I'm pleased that Mike talked about that partnership, so I can talk about another one with MasterCard, because I think it touches on so many of these issues. We discovered together with the MasterCard team based in Southeast Asia, something that we really didn't know, that women often save during their pregnancies for prenatal care, delivery, and then antenatal care with their midwife. And it was all on a cash basis, all very informal. And so together we worked with a local fintech to look at, could we digitize that savings process? And at the same time, then actually build another income stream for that midwife. So she's now not only becoming taking advantage of that long-term trust relationship to continue to bank with that low-income woman patient / client of hers, but we've made her into a cash in, cash out center for the village. So she's got additional revenue coming into her business, and it just played on so many of these issues I think we've already talked about in terms of the trusted advisor. I can just feel the necessity, since we were talking about women in the labor force. We're seeing some really exciting research on women agents as mobile money provider agents, that both men and women seem to feel more comfortable with female agents, even just frankly asking stupid questions or things that people think of as stupid questions. They're more comfortable asking the woman. Women have better results in a number of countries, very different geographies, different cultures, at signing clients up, getting clients who've registered to actually start using the service. They're better at cross-selling for other products. So say you've got you've been using a payment product, they're better at cross-selling into insurance, for example. And so we're very excited actually about building up a cadre of women agents. And just to quickly touch on our growing partnerships with some governments, because as Miguel mentioned, a financial inclusion strategy is so critical for governments, and more governments are recognizing the importance of that, but they're kind of getting a couple of years into the strategy and realizing if they don't look specifically at what some of the barriers to women's inclusion are, they're just not going to be able to achieve their targets. So we worked very closely with the CNBV in Mexico to look at what would a sort of a women's overlay need to look like of their financial inclusion strategy. So our partnerships with government have dramatically expanded in the last few years. And
we have an audience of social entrepreneurs today. What advice would you give them as they think about partnering with big private sector companies like MasterCard, or indeed with governments?
I think Mike really, hit the nail on the head. Just think about putting yourself in their shoes. What's in it for them? I tend to think that most things that are really sustainable and will live on beyond that initial, influx of donor capital and the press release and all of that are the ones that really address the enlightened interest of all of the partners. So I really encourage them to think about what's in it for their partner.
And I mean, yeah.
I'm sorry, can I intervene? I'd love just to add on to that, because I spent about half my working life in government and the other half in the private sector. And when I was in government, we talked a lot about public-private partnerships, which usually meant we wanted the private sector to write us a check. And I think what's really changed over the last couple of decades, and really over the last few years, is just how serious companies are about wanting to have positive social impact, whether it's because it's being demanded by their employees or their shareholders or their other stakeholders. And my one message to the social entrepreneurs in the audience is because I've always been struck at how there's a trust gap between the private sector and sometimes the social sector, where the social sector says, well, can we really work with the private sector, or aren't they going to want to just make money off of this? And I would just urge our social entrepreneurs to keep an open mind and try and work with us, try and help companies do it and do it the right way. Ultimately, you want the companies to be able to do this in a commercially sustainable way, because that's the only way that their interventions are going to be scalable. If it's all about philanthropy, it's always going to be limited. If they can find a way of doing it on a commercially sustainable way, and I don't mean making large profits off of it or anything of that sort, but so that it breaks even and that the company can continue to justify investment in it, then they're going to really have an interest in seeing it grow and expand. And that's going to require partnership and trust between the private and the social sector.
So when you say co-creation, I mean, that does have that degree of granularity in your mind when you think about, you've got to sit down and figure out what is the business model essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. Miguel, do feel free to talk about partnerships as well, but we have a question from Janet Longmore, which you might also have thoughts about, which is, do you see different behaviors with respect to trust, particularly trust in government, trust in financial institutions from younger generations? Are they demonstrating more proactive behavior in how trusted systems need to be developed, particularly around the digital social safety net?
Well, generally on partnerships, the Tec de Monterrey has a long experiences working with the private sector, and they, have been very important for the institution all the time throughout decades. And today, Tec de Monterrey has just issued a social impact report, informing people about literally hundreds of initiatives that take place within the Tec de Monterrey that have a social impact. Many of these activities are done with a partnership with a company, a private company, or the government, or the social sector of entrepreneurs. So it is a long tradition for the Tec de Monterrey. The second, I think this is the hope that the new generations will develop a new attitude working with not only with the private sector, but they will go digitalized, and they will go, they will participate in the financial system. But to build up that, you have to build up reputation. You have to be a good reputation. You have to have a good reputation, so people, the younger generation, really can give you trust and reliability. I think the government and the private sector should focus on that, how to build up a good reputation, how you can convince people that you're not going to misuse their data, their personal data, their biometric data, how you are going to really work for them and not use them for your own purposes. That is the key for the younger generation, I would say.
But as you look at your students, do you see, I mean, presumably they're as digitally native as any other students in the world, but are they still showing hesitancy with regard to the financial stuff and how data is used, or is it pretty much just the older generations?
It is difficult, I mean, to say, I don't have evidence to say my students, which belong to, after all, up to a private university, have or not have a confidence or trust. What I would say, what is important is the messenger. The messenger has to build up trust based on reputation. And this may take time. This may take, some time to build up this reputation. My guess is that both government, the private sector, and institutions such as the Tec de Monterrey with the FAIR Center, we have to work in tandem with a multi-actor alliance, yes, or many multi-actor alliances, but focus on a specific, we have to go local. What is happening in Cuernavaca? what is happening in Veracruz, what is happening in Monterrey, what is happening in Mexico City. Because we have now the general framework. There have been a lot of progress, but you have to focus now on local needs and local expectations.
Great. Obviously at MasterCard, you have a lot of access to data about different generations' behavior. What are you seeing fundamental differences amongst younger people in terms of their willingness to trust and their desire to be part of a digital strategy around inclusive growth?
Well, they're certainly digital native from the beginning. They're so used to it. But again, I think this is an area where COVID has had an impact. And I use my 91-year-old father as the example, who never bought anything online and now is totally dependent on grocery delivery made from his iPad. So, and he's not going back the other way. I think as people learn, to Mary Ellen's point, men and women learn digital skills, particularly women, and get used to it. It is likely to stick and create new opportunities for them. So yes, there's a bit of a generational divide, but I have a feeling that divide has been narrowed somewhat over the last 14 months or so.
Mary Ellen, what are you seeing on that front?
There definitely seems to be, sort of pre-COVID, there definitely was this generation gap. It indeed, any of the sort of youth savings, youth banking programs that we were offering, if they didn't have a digital component, if they didn't, in fact, in many cases, include some level of gamification and building financial services into young people's digital lives, the product just wouldn't fly. But we are seeing just a recognition of the need for digital, across generations now.
Great. So I wanted to ask a question about MasterCard's Center for Inclusive Growth, and particularly if any, or indeed more broadly, if any of our social entrepreneurs that are watching today, want to contact you, want to be potential partners of MasterCard, what should they know about what the goal of your center is, about how the company approaches being approached by people with desire to partner with you?
We welcome the approach. The center started about 7 years ago. Shamina Singh is our founder and president of the center, and we're focused broadly on financial security for individuals, for micro and small businesses, and for workers. We're doing a lot of work on the future of workers and what it means to have a modernized benefit system and portable benefit system for gig workers and the like. We're also focused on data science for social impact, including how data analytics can be used by governments and social sector participants to promote economic development, place-based economic development. So we welcome the incoming. It's a small team, but they work really hard, and they're always looking for good ideas.
And I'd ask a similar question to you, Miguel. I mean, people, our Mexican social entrepreneurs, how should they? Are there things that they should come to you to talk about and potentially partner with you on?
Well, one of the things that has changed, in my view, in the last 2 years, because of the pandemic, is that much more people realizes today the importance of inclusiveness. That after all, we are all dependent on each other, either persons or countries. So that is, after this shocking experience of the pandemic, that's very good news. I think more people today realize the importance of, social activities or activities that may have a positive social impact. In that sense, I would say the Tec de Monterrey, again, has a tremendous rich experience promoting these kind of activities, promoting partnerships, promoting learning, promoting, good citizens, or the education of good citizens to be responsible for other people. I think that culture has been reinforced because of the pandemic. Today, if you go only for your own profits or your own particular interests, many people will say, well, why don't you give something to society? Either if you're a company, you cannot, respond only to your shareholders. You all have a social responsibility. In that sense, I would say there is a good environment to promote more multi-actor alliances. Governments cannot do, the implementation of the sustainable development goals, but alone. Governments need the private sector. Governments need social organizations, civil society organizations, and they need us, universities and research centers. And so I think our responsibility is to work with them. And the initiative that I am very honored to be the head of, we are working in teaching, we are working in researching, we are working in evaluating and promoting new public policies. We are part of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So in that sense, you are promoting and you are making connections with many, many other people, companies, governments, at the three levels, the federal government, the state governments, and municipal governments. I think our responsibility is really to take the SDGs implementation to the municipal level, but we need each other.
Thank you very much. So we're almost out of time, and I'm mindful that we have our closing session of the whole Catalyzing Change Week at the top of the hour. So I'd just like to ask each of you, really, as we think about the next 12 months in particular, and you have this audience of people who are very active on the ground as social entrepreneurs, what would be the number one thing they should be focusing on with regard to building on the positives of digital inclusion over the last that we've seen during the pandemic, but also to obviously address the groups that have been most excluded during this time because they haven't had the digital access that others of us have taken for granted as we've switched to a consumption to Amazon and Netflix and so forth. And so I'll start with you, Mary Ellen, and then Miguel, and then we'll finish with Mike.
Well, it's not perhaps an original statement, but the whole idea of not letting this crisis go to waste. We have been talking as an industry about gender disaggregated financial data. The time it first came up, Miguel, was when Mexico hosted the G20, and that was, I think, over a decade ago. This is such an easy win for financial service providers to really know who their customers are, what they're using, what they have access to. It seems like such a no-brainer, and yet the vast majority of countries and financial service providers do not collect data on a gender disaggregated data basis. The IDB did a survey of 114 banks in Latin America. Only 7 of them collected the data, and they all apparently quite sheepishly, according to the research I read, admitted that they didn't really refer to the data when they were making managerial decisions, which is just sort of insane. And at the same time, I'd urge policymakers and regulators in particular to demand that data be disaggregated. Chile is, to come back to Latin America, is the model for over 30 years, has been collecting gender disaggregated data at the banking supervision level, and have been able to drive huge changes, policy changes in terms of savings, offering housing products that women were much more likely to want to take up than men were, or than other kinds of products. And so it just seems like a wonderful moment to accomplish something that we all know makes a lot of sense, and just have not been able to bring ourselves to do it. Great,
thank you. Before I turn to you, Miguel, quickly, they want to put up an audience poll question. So let's put the question up if we can. And then I'm going to ask Miguel just to keep talking while people answer. But what's the single biggest barrier preventing people from being digitally and financially included? So access, availability, affordability of internet connection, etc., skills, deficits in knowledge and so forth, or trust. so please do, if you're watching, answer that question. I'll give you the results hopefully before the end. But Miguel, your final one challenge for us.
Well, I think at least in the case of Mexico, it's difficult to choose or to decide, this is the most important thing. I think the three of them are very important. Access, Mexico, we don't have.
No, actually, I wanted you just quickly to say, what do you think is the one challenge that people should be focusing on in the year ahead?
Trust. Develop trust with reputation, a good reputation.
And Mike, one challenge for us.
Yeah. Let's finish what we've started. COVID gave us an opportunity to go digital. Let's make sure we're doing it, being intentional about inclusion of women, inclusion of underserved communities, and make sure that everything we do is designed to be inclusive.
Fantastic. Okay, and so it looks like the poll, we're pretty evenly divided between access and trust as the number one, with 45% saying all three of these factors are equally important. So so it seems like skills, the deficits in knowledge, are seen as the least important at this point. Anyway, make of that what you will. I'd like to thank the three panelists for a very thought-provoking conversation. I mean, I do think that it's very clear that we are in a world that's much more digital coming out of COVID, hopefully, than we were going in, and that anyone who's concerned, and all the Catalyst 2030 members are, about the people who've been excluded and most marginalized over the last 30 or 40 years, as the rest of the world has seen increasing prosperity, that we have to figure out how to include them in this digital revolution in a way that addresses their fears and lack of trust, and makes the digital divide go away. And so I thank you for encouraging us and giving us some practical steps on the way forward. And we look forward as Catalyst 2030 to working with you all in future. And with that, thank you. And over to our final, please do go and log on to our final closing session, where we have very important people who are very focused on the global governance questions that are on the table at meetings like the G20 and G7 this coming year, and how the sort of things we've been talking about can be advanced in this very, very complicated and difficult global agenda that's being addressed this year. So thank you everyone for being with us today, and thank you for Mike, Miguel and Mary Ellen for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.